Hey everyone, it is me, Lauren, your creative mentor. And today we're going to keep following our theme of kind of like a work life balance, bringing stress and trauma into like your working life or whatever. We're at 6 months here. Yippee. But last week we talked about art school and kind of how that didn't really set us all up for like success really because of like the habits it instills and how it affects our finances and all this stuff. And so today I want to go over kind of like pandemic trauma and like stress we're kind of all unpacking. And while I'm not going to have necessarily all of the answers for that, I think it's important to at least address because it's something we're all going through. And it's shaken us up. At least I know it's shaken me up as far as like working and career and like everything has a different meaning these days, it seems like. So we're going to kind of explore that together. But like I always say, if someone's giving you advice on your career, your money, or your happiness, you should always vet who that person is. I am no different. You can check out my LinkedIn. It's Lauren Versino, spelled exactly how it sounds. And you can see my working history and, you know, the work I do with the AIGA, the American Illustration Graphics like Association. And all of that. I'm not affiliated with them, but I built this podcast to kind of even the playing field for everybody because I think there's a lot of gatekeeping in the design industry. And I think the most punk rock and destructive thing you can do is give everyone the same rules to play by. So that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to be helpful in this way. And I very intentionally put the episodes of the podcast out that I do in the order that I do because this is built a lot like a class. So if this is your first interaction with the podcast, you'll be fine. We're not going to necessarily talk about a bunch of shit we've already covered, but just so you're aware, you're kind of walking into like a 201 class versus 101. So feel free to explore, but feel free to stay. So today, I kind of just want to walk through how, first of all, the pandemic is hard. And I use is because depending on where you live in the country, it's affecting you differently. Me in Chicago, about 60% of the state of Illinois is vaccinated. And Chicago just last week fully opened up like stage 5 or phase 5. You don't have to wear masks anywhere unless the business has otherwise stated. And honestly, like I've been trying to get back out there and I'm waiting for my like company's office to tell me what to do. Am I going to stay home? Am I going to go back to like an office? Is there a hybrid system? What does that look like? There are all of these questions we're all going through right now, and everybody's answers are all a little bit different. So I just kind of want to like touch on this in like a time capsule way. But I also want to walk through like my own feelings because I know I'm not the only one who feels like this. But I went back out in the world just to see what it felt like. And it just feels very like weird and overwhelming because I was a person who stayed inside the whole pandemic. Like I followed the rules, and it was very frustrating to watch people just like get away with not following the rules and watching people get infected and having nothing happen. And like, you know, while I don't personally know someone who's like been killed by COVID, I know a lot of people whose relatives were, and I watched them go through the grieving process of that. And I watched friends and family get sick, and I've seen the prolonged, like long COVID they've had and how it's affected their ability to do XYZ thing. And so to me, COVID is very real. And to me, it's very, I have very little empathy and patience for people who want to sit here and tell me that my caution was an overreaction. 600,000 people are dead. That's very serious. And I constantly worry that people won't remember that. That's just how I feel, both as a creative, a person who went through this. And someone who has to go to work probably with people who feel oppositely from me. And I don't know how I'm going to handle that interpersonal skill when I come to it. I just have no idea yet. My mic stand just fucked up. My mic stand got fucked up and I had to stop and fix it. So, oops. Anyway, I was talking about something very serious for something very silly to start happening. But, yeah, that's where my mind is. You know, COVID was very serious at my house, and you know, I take that very seriously, and I'm not going to just snap my fingers and go back to normal. Like, it's not normal. We all had to work from home. I'm still working from home. So in a weird way, like, no signal really other than my town opening up has happened to say everything's fine. And it was very interesting to work from home through COVID. I'm very fortunate, and like job wise was pretty unaffected. We had to take a pay cut temporarily. And we still lost a fair amount of people to being laid off for XYZ reason, but it didn't affect me, which in a creative department is very rare. So I really count my lucky stars all the time. But, you know, now I'm at this point where it's like over, quote unquote, for me in my environment. And now I sit and like, I have these moments I didn't really have before where I just sit quietly in my house and look out the window and think, and just, it feels very pointless, you know? Oh, this is all made up stuff. Traffic, buying a coffee on the corner for $7, you know, parking, paying for parking, walking to the grocery store, shopping small business. Like, these are made up problems. You know, important things are looking at stars and hearing birds and smelling grass and knowing how to grow things. Like, that's just how I feel, especially because I live in a huge city too, where like outside my window, it's just buildings. I don't have any grass. Like, I just have a balcony that I grow plants on. And it's just this, like, I can't escape it. I have yet to shake that off. And in a way, like, pick me at work feels really pointless. And it's not that I'm not engaged in my job. It's just like, this could all end tomorrow. It practically did last year, you know? Everything got turned upside down. And like, it's not like, what's the point? But at the same time, it's like, what does this even mean right now to me? What do I care about this? I took a week off to just like spend time with my best friend and be in my house and walk outside and try to get reacclimated. And when I came back to work this past week, I was just like, why do I work so hard? And that's not to say I'm not grateful for my job. And that's not to say I don't enjoy my job. But like, just in this moment of processing pandemic trauma, it just feels very silly, you know, and disenfranchising, and like, you know, with everything else that happened in the pandemic, with like the second round civil rights and the protests and the wage gap and the corruption and the police and all this stuff that I watched out my window during the George Floyd protest. I'm not calling it a riot in Chicago, not the first one. My city put up the bridges, and so much tear gas was being used, you guys, in downtown. I live on the 15th floor. I had to close all my windows because I couldn't breathe in my own house. Like, it's so disenfranchising to like watch all of that happen and see the wage gap and see the corruption and feel really small. Nothing made us feel smaller than like a pandemic that we couldn't get organized on, the corruption in our government, the wages, the loan, all the stuff that's happening that you try to push out of your mind, but it affects you every day. It just does. So going back to a capitalistic job to make somebody else more money than you'll ever see in your life, even though you love your job and it fills you with a lot of purpose outside of just working, it's a weird place to be, and seeing people struggle and seeing people die and all this stuff. And it's traumatic. All of us. It's traumatic. I work in the background you see, if you're like watching me on YouTube, this is my office. I live in this room all day, every day. I do my creative work here and I do my work here, and I'm virtually on the phone all the time and doing the whatever. And it's odd. And like remote working is odd. All pandemic, the only people I saw every day were the people I worked with. During a time I could not travel to go see my family or my friends. I couldn't even walk down the street sometimes to go see my friends. I saw the people I worked with every single day through the pandemic. And you could tell some days, like, we were all just like, what the heck? And we all watched the insurrection happen on our TVs at home, IMing each other. And it was just like very weird. And because I couldn't physically go see my family, but I saw my coworkers every day, like that relationship with those people is like a super weird hybrid right now too. And like part of me is like, I'm so sick of you people because I see them every day and I just want to go see my family and my friends. But on the other hand, like I went through this entire situation with them together, and I saw them at their lowest. We saw each other at our highest when we're celebrating, and like it's just a very weird like relationship that this whole entire office culture now gets to process or have no second thought about. And I think about it a lot, and it's very, I'm bonded with these people for the rest of my life, no matter how I feel about it. Because we went through the global pandemic together virtually, from in an office to not. And now we have a whole group of our team that was onboarded and has never been to the office, and I've never seen them in real life. And now I'm probably going to get to. And like that is all very bizarre, and we're not like used to that. And it's not good and it's not bad. It's just weird. And so like that is all something we're all working through right now together. And it's just kind of weird. And it turns into one of those things where like, do you acknowledge it or do you not? And like, that's kind of how going through the pandemic was at work, because office culture and corporation culture, even within creative groups, who are, I would argue, are more emotionally in tune to each other, there were a lot of days where we just were pretending it wasn't happening, and that would really bother me. But also, like, do you want to bring that up? Not really. And so it's just kind of weird. And now that it's quote unquote over, or we're about to go into this like hybrid model of like going to the office or staying home, I would love to stay home, or anything like that. Like, it's just another adjustment, another big adjustment on top of everything. And it's just kind of weird. And do I know what to do with that? No. But also, I'm a big fan of just saying things because nobody else seems to say them. And I think this whole episode is just that about the pandemic. And like, you know, I have a lot of friends who were fired in the pandemic, and it really traumatized them. To lose your stability during one of the most unstable times, like just being fired at all sucks. I've been through it. It puts you in a panic. What am I going to do? How am I going to pay the bills? What's going to happen? I didn't even have to worry about my health at the time. But to lose your health insurance and your job security during a global pandemic, that had to have been the scariest shit in the world for people to go through. And now we're all trying to get our jobs back if we lost them. That this whole survival, I got fired at the drop of a hat for something I couldn't control, I feel out of control, feeling is unresolved in all of us. And, you know, there's like, I forget what the actual like time frame is, but there's like surviving, like getting through something temporary that's like a couple of weeks or a month, and then there's adapting, which is over a year. And we have adapted to being in a pandemic because it happened for a year and a half, and now out of nowhere almost we get to adapt back, but like we've adapted, so now we have to go through the whole adaptation process again. And that's hard. That's really tough. Like, yeah, humans are resilient. Yay, us. But like, that's tough. And it's just a very strange thing. It was a vet. A vet on TikTok was talking about that because he was talking about how difficult it is to like be at war and be warring it up every single day. And then you come back and you're just a civilian and there is no like process of re-assimilation back into society. And to a certain extent, that's happening to all of us, depending on how the pandemic affected you. Some people, the pandemic might not as well have happened. They just kind of did whatever they wanted and they raised their stink about masks and whatever. They just did what they were going to do regardless. And they're not having that problem. And then there's people like me who stayed inside, followed the rules, wear their mask, washed their groceries down before they put them away, like that whole thing. And adapting back to people being outside all the time. I went to the grocery store today and like a couple people weren't wearing masks and it was just like weird. And I was like thinking about it because I went and ran a bunch of errands today and I wore my mask in every single place, even though they said I didn't have to. And it dawned on me, I was like, I'm doing this for my own comfort. I'm not ready to like let go of the mask, even though I'm vaccinated. I've traveled like on a couple road trips and I've had people visit me, but I'm not ready to be in a general people setting without my mask. And like that was a big moment that honestly made me want to come in here and just talk about this because it affects us and we're going to bring that to work. And it's going to be with us as we reevaluate ourselves, because up until this point we're like, well, how does this system work? And like I've acknowledged the pandemic through this whole process and this whole podcast, but the stakes are different and the system is changing. Like I don't know what the hybrid remote thing is going to do. I don't know how much more competitive some jobs are going to become. I don't know, because nobody does. We haven't been in this situation before. I don't know if a better growth opportunity shows up for me, if it's something I want to take because I like the stability of where I am. I don't know how competitive looking for more work, if I want to grow into a different role, will look like, because when you had the proximity of where you lived being the talent pool to, it could be anyone in the country, I don't know how that's going to shape cities. I don't know how that's going to shape the job force. I don't know how that's going to shape wages, if at all. I don't know. But that's what I mean by we're going to bring this to work. We're going to bring this to our practices. Maybe it'll cause an entire renaissance of creativity and everyone can just like have an equal playing field. And if you have a good enough skill set or someone wants to give you a shot, it doesn't matter where you're from. That would be badass. I love that. But we're going to have this hybrid model of working, just like this hybrid model of remote or going into an office. And I don't know how company cultures are going to change because of that. So it's all very like uprooted on top of the individual asking, what, this feels pointless. What am I doing? Am I working too hard? What does a job need to give me for me to keep working like this? Yada, yada, yada. And that's a very interesting question to me right now that I do not have an answer or a theory for. But if you're someone who's going into the workforce with these thoughts, you're going to be sitting right next to someone like me who's been doing this for 8 years, who's having the same thoughts. And as far as like corporation culture and like management and leadership staff, like I don't really know what conversations they're having, if any. But depending on the age of your worker, it's a conversation I think that's worth having. How do you retain everybody when there are going to be different competitive perks for other people to be fully remote? I love working in my office, even if I feel trapped in here sometimes. It doesn't have any windows, but like I do everything in here. I have space to do this. My roommate that I love dearly moved out to his own space so he could do the same thing. The pandemic didn't like hinder our friendship in any way, but it required us to live differently and separately from each other, even though we went through that together in the same space, just like my coworkers on my screen. And it's just, I don't know. These are just a couple of thoughts I just jotted down on like going back to work, you know, cities getting back into the swing of things. all of this stuff. I would really be interested to know how you all feel, especially if you're like a brand new or young worker, because like comparatively, I'm not the youngest person I work with, but I work with a lot of older people that I'm very curious how their perspective of this goes. Because also, like, people were stuck at home with their families, with small children and school, and like that's a whole other layer of this that didn't affect me, that affected a lot of people. And I'm just like, I'm curious how that shifts the priorities of how we view time. Because now that we're not commuting, we all have a lot of our own time back. And I could not imagine having to commute at least an hour a day. Some people would do 3 hours a day. I couldn't imagine doing that because of how much I get done, how much time I have to myself. And honestly, some days in the pandemic were so hard for me to get through. I would ping my manager on the side and just be like, I need a break. Like, I'm going to step away for like a couple hours because I'm just sitting at my desk and I'm about to just like burst into tears because this is just hard today. Or I learned someone got sick and I'm scared, and I like working on this feels stupid. And like, I don't want to do this or think about it until I have time and emotional bandwidth to do it. And I had other coworkers that would just like pop off on a rant I wasn't ready for. And it's just like, they weren't mad at me. They were just being mad to me. And it had nothing to do with me. And it just like, you could see the pain in everybody. And it really had me asking, like, what are the boundaries here? And the fact that we're home, we actually have space to be away and feel our feelings and not go cry in a public bathroom or lay really depressed on your bed for 3 hours on TikTok because you just needed it. I've been doing that when I need to. And it's just like really nice to have space to do that, to process that, because we have to process this. I write stuff and I make like video logs for myself where I just like go into these like metaphysical thoughts where I'm just like thinking like this almost feels pointless because what's the answer? You know, we're creatives. We think this way. There's no answer to the question sometimes, and that's really difficult to accept, especially when you realize how out of control things can feel, like a pandemic. So, I don't know. I'm just saying this to like explore this thought. It's going to be a continuous one, and to just like say it because we're all going through it. And I don't know if y'all feel like this or anything like that, but it's something that affects us. It affects the way that we make things. It affects the ways that we process things, and it affects the way we behave at work. It's like a grab bag of garbage. And like, you know, I'll go a little more into like managing stress at work and stuff, and like how to kind of take a beat, how you hear things in your head versus how they were actually written, what to do if someone just pops off at you and you're like, I do not have the emotional bandwidth for this. But we'll explore more of that next week. And this one's a little bit shorter just because it's more of a like meandering curiosity. But I just wanted to say all of that out loud to just, in case you're thinking about it too, just we can think about it together if you want. And if you haven't any thoughts about that, you can reach out to me on like heading over to my, what is it called? My LinkedIn. You can look me up, Lauren Versino. Write me a note. I don't cold accept people, but I'll gladly connect with you. If you write me a little note, we can talk. Or head over to my Patreon. I would love to have like a comments discussion about this, or even in my YouTube comments if you watch my podcast. But my podcast, you know what it's called. My Patreon is called The Creative Mentor Podcast. I do have some premium content, but I keep it all for free as best I can. But it's $2 gets you this podcast a week in advance, and then $7 gets you the workbook, because like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I set this up very intentionally, kind of like a class. And so every month on the last day of the month, I release a workbook that has like questions to work through, or if I mention any like links like the salary guide or anything, those are in there as interactive PDFs, and hopefully it can just kind of help you navigate a little bit more instead of like listening to these a million times. or even something to like write in, just like it's just like a little workbook. Honestly, I'm hoping I get to a good space where I can like publish it eventually, because I think that would be kind of fun. But either way, that's over at the Patreon. You can find me on TikTok, The Creative Mentor, but if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already know that. That's where most of you come from. Or on YouTube. My YouTube is actually my name because I've had the account for 100 years, so it's just Lauren Versino, like my LinkedIn. But that's all for today, and I will talk to you guys next week.